Hello and welcome once again to Spiritism, a closer look. This is our program number 12, transmitted through Kardec Radio. As always, we encourage you to visit our website, kardecradio.com, for our programming grid, which is excellent. There's a lot of information on a lot of topics about Spiritism, really broad in terms of reach. So I encourage you to go there and check us out. Okay, Spiritism, a closer look, number 12, evolution. So we are gonna start, as always, with the question posted last week. And here's the question that was posted last week. Hopefully you had a chance to participate with us. So let's see what we got here. Which of the following is not one of the four great peoples formed by the exiles from Capella? So we explained that last week, how the whole thing happened. We're going to detail a little bit more today, actually. But anyway, we got to the basics of it. So which one of these did not come from Capella? Well, Chinese is the answer. If you answer Chinese, you got it right. All the other four that you have here listed, Hindu, Aryans, Hebrews, and Egyptians, they were all exiles from Capella. The Chinese were here on Earth prior to the arrival of the other four. So they did not come from Capella. They were already established in the planets. You can find that information on this book, which I actually showed you last time, On the Way to the Light. It's a great book. There's a lot of information about evolution here, evolution of the races and all of that. We are going to use this book again today to develop our subject in today's meeting. Okay, so let's go back to where we had last week. We stopped more or less right here where we explain what this means. We are in a cycle, and this cycle, the first half of the cycle of evolution has an initial period of 64,000 years, followed by 7 groups of races, each one of 28,000 years. So we explained about the exiles from Capella that happened a little bit before the Aryan race, so prior to 24,000 BC. We explained there was a change in the DNA from early in the cycle, where the Neanderthal were the inhabitants on Earth, and the DNA was reworked, and then we had a new DNA style that at the time, many, many years ago, science used to call them Cro-Magnon. The name is not used anymore, but for our references, we still use that name. So this is what we presented last time. Today we're gonna see the mechanics, how this thing really happened, how these people got on the planet, and migration, and going from one place to another. So let's just get to this today and see what we get, right? All right, so here's a map of the planets. Again, we just saw in the question that the Spirit Trivia for last week, that one race was here prior to the Capellans came out, and that was the Chinese. So actually, 2 of them were here prior to the exiles of Capella showing up. The blacks dominated the southern part of Africa. They were here before the exiles of Capella. And the yellow ones, the Chinese, they were here before, as we just saw it. So these groups of people, they were here prior to the events of Capella. All right, so Capella sent out, we explained that last week. So from Capella, we start receiving on Earth several spirits, groups of spirits that are more advanced physically, morally, and intellectually, that will help the planet Earth in terms of development and moral advance, especially moral advancement. So when they start coming in, and we just saw prior slide, they started coming in before 24,000 BC. Okay, so anywhere before that. And according to Emmanuel on the book On the Way to the Light, in principle, mostly they come to Asia, where modern India is today, in that area more or less. So they start populating the area. And those are, again, those are not Neanderthal anymore. Those are Cro-Magnon, okay? From India, a smaller group, not all of them, but a group comes to Egypt. So they cross over to the west side, they go over the peninsula, and they establish themselves in Egypt. So that's the first migration on the planet, okay? All right, so let's keep going. That, of course, that doesn't stop there. So let's get a closer look at the map so we can show, especially Europe and Asia, closer, so we can explain what happened. So we got three colors here. China, because they were here, Chinese were here before any of this thing. India and Egypt received the first, I would say the first batch, per se, of the exiles of Capella. So they established initially in India, some of them go over to Egypt, but you see this transmigration of spirits from Capella over here. It's not something that happened at one shot and it stops. No, it's an ongoing process. So these migrations, these transmigrations, right, of spirits, they keep happening. It's a non-stop thing. And the incarnated spirits then are migrating within the planet, on the surface of the planet. They're moving from east to west, west to east, whatever it is. But new incarnations are taking place. Okay, it's not a spotted thing. Some spirits came over, incarnated, and the transmigrations stopped. No. Okay. All right. So from India, they start migrating to the west. Okay. And they will, as they go migrating to the west, they will have contact with those who were already on the planet. Okay, there was a great concentration of them in China, as we saw, but they were scattered. There were smaller tribes and groups scattered throughout modern-day Europe and Western Asia. So all those groups that we're showing here in blue, they are kind of established. They have their lives and their groups and tribes and everything else. When the exiles of Capella, now incarnated here on Earth, start migrating from India to the West throughout Western Europe and Western Asia and Europe, they will have contact with these existing tribes. And that generates a lot of complications, a lot of fights, a lot of disagreements, and also among themselves, among the exiles themselves, because they had this idea that they kind of own the land. So I put my feet here on this land before you, so now that's mine, get out of here, I own this place. And pretty much we're still like this, in a way, we are still very connected to the idea of the possession of the land. Anyway, so this thing takes place, and one thing that I need to make sure that you understand is this migration here that is represented by the red line coming from India, migrating to the west, is not a migration of a one lifetime when, like in the United States, the old guys would leave from the East Coast inland, literally walking towards the west of the country. That's not what this is. This is not a migration, a physical migration of one lifetime, people walking to the west. No. This is a sequence, a huge sequence of incarnations that are taking place a little bit western than the prior generation. Then the next generation is a little bit more west. Then the other one a little bit more west. These are generations after generations after generations, which as Spiritists we could understand as incarnations after reincarnations after reincarnations. It's a long shot. This is not something that somebody starts walking today out of India. In 10 years, they're going to be in Portugal. No, okay? This needs to be understood. It's a long, long, long process. And like I said, a lot of fighting, a lot of disagreements because of the idea that I now own the land, I possess the land, and you can't get close because it belongs to me. So this idea of separation starts to grow really strong, and of course it generates a lot of wars and fights and everything else. And I'll tell you, it's still like that today. Maybe not as barbarian as before, but we're still attached to the idea of owning the land and all of that. Anyway, so from India, these groups start to come, migrate to the left. And at one point, as soon as they get to modern day Europe, they separate. So they go through different channels, different ways. Each one, some go west, some go a little bit to the south, some go north. It's, they kind of separate. And that's going to provide us with an explanation, according to Emmanuel, on how things really got started in Europe. So those who go to Greece, modern day Greece, I have to use the current country name because otherwise we couldn't, tell you exactly where things happen. So I'm using the name Greece. Of course, at the time there were no Greece, no Italy, no France, nothing like this. But if we don't go by the modern day name, we're not going to get anywhere. So one group goes to Greece. That will give origin to the Greek culture and the entire civilization. And they were very attached to the idea of arts, especially music, and teaching. These people, that's why they were together and separated from the other ones, because they always thought that teaching the next generation, teaching the kids, teaching just somebody else was something really important for personal growth, personal development. Okay, so that is characteristic of Greece and the Greeks. Another group goes to modern day Italy, and that will give birth to the Latins per se. Okay, so the Latins are going to be all around Italy, a little bit north of Italy, central north of Italy, and a little bit east of Italy as well, the Latins. Another group goes further west, all the way into modern day France. And from there, we're going to see the origin for the Celts. The Celts will come from that group that made its way all the way to the west of Western Europe as far as France. And another group goes a little bit north, and they go to modern day Germany. That will give birth to all the Germans and Saxons and all those people. And one interesting thing about them is they kind of separated from the others because they had this idea that things could not be static, where you just sit there like this and you wait for things to happen. They were looking after something different, something more. They were always looking for something more. There's gonna be more. I need more. I want to find new things. I want to search and research, which probably the best words to use, modern word, is a general idea of progress. So they were very attached to the idea of progress. That's important. That was important for them. And that was a driving force for the Germans and Saxons, just like a driving force for the Greeks was arts and teaching. And one interesting thing, the people that came to the Eastern Mediterranean, so that would be North Egypt, more or less in that area, they are the ones to make it, and also Iraq, modern day Iraq, Iran, they were the first to bring the idea of using of writing. That came from the Sumerians that are, they used to be in Iraq, Iran area, and northeast, I would say, of Egypt. So the idea of writing and putting things on, writing on the walls, as we see, right? It came from those people. It came from them. Okay? All right. So that's how Europe starts to be populated. Now, one thing that needs to be clear is those blue dots that I showed you here, those were the tribes and groups that were already established before these migrations from India to the West. And those were Neanderthals. Those were prior to the exiles of Capella, which bring a new DNA under the name of Cro-Magnon. And that's, of course, with the migration and mix of races and mix of people and groups and tribes, the descendants of the Neanderthal, little by little, will have their DNA changed, or maybe a better word is updated, right? We are in a technological era. Everything is updated. So the DNA, little by little, generation after generation, will be updated until a certain generation down the road, they become Cro-Magnon instead of Neanderthal, and the Neanderthal will disappear because it will get replaced. But in the beginning, the first Cro-Magnon, they are descendants of the Neanderthal. All right. Okay, let's keep going. Let's zoom a little bit in the Middle Eastern area. So we saw these migrations coming from India, which is east of the area here, all the way into Europe. But because of all the fighting, all the disagreements, some people could not just settle anywhere because they wanted to settle where groups were already in place, other groups and other tribes and other people. So they would fight, they would be, they wouldn't have to look for somewhere else. The somewhere else that they wanted is also a place where there's people installed, there's people settled, and they will fight again, they will leave and look for another place, and it goes on like this. Because of all the, they're here, remember, right? They're here because their moral standards in regards to to their orb, Capella, was not that much great. It was not that great. So these groups start to find a little bit more difficult to find a place. So they start coming back all the way to the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, and get all together in there and make their way to Palestine. And those are the Hebrews. So the Hebrews did not at all want to mix races, mix with other people other than themselves. They would not take the idea of living, among other peoples not very well. So they created this general idea that Emmanuel uses these words that you see on your screen on the top left, top right: exclusive vanity. So they had this idea that they were the chosen ones, they were the best, and they had to be a pure race, if you will, and they would not just simply mix with anybody else. It was out of the question, out of their ideas. So they established themselves in the area of Palestine with all the fighting and everything else, which, by the way, never stopped. It still goes on. Every day you turn on the news and they're fighting. Okay? So that's a global general idea of how everything happened. If we could summarize this, okay, in a very direct and simple way, we had the blacks and the yellows in place before the exiles of Capella. When they come, when they start incarnating here, again, they will populate after the migrations. They will populate 4 areas, which are shown right here. The Aryans populate Europe. In Palestine, are the Hebrews, in Africa are the Egyptians, and in Asia are the Hindu. Now, each one of these four groups, they had some particular characteristics, some particular things that it's worth mentioning here. So let's just take a quick look. First, at the Egyptians. Of all these groups that came from Capella, and remember, they came here because they were not up to speed in terms of moral standards up there. So they were transmigrated to have the opportunity to not only help us develop, but to work on their own things and, redo their moral standards to be able to go back to Capella. That was the global idea, the general idea. So of all these groups, the Egyptians were the ones with fewest moral debts. They were the less worst ones. Let's put it this way, right? And they were the first ones to be able to go back to Capella because they were the first ones that were able to, in quotes, I would say, recover from their fault, their moral faults. And that's interesting because they go back, they leave, and there are no traces. And that's why it's so difficult when you try to, I would say, when science in general tries to follow the path of all the races and everything else, there's a lot of holes, a lot of things we don't have an explanation because there's not enough material left. There's not enough information left. And, writing did not start until 4500 BC. So it's really difficult for us today to trace in terms of history. If we don't have information like the one you have from spirits or especially Emmanuel, he's the one that addresses this beautifully. Science-based only explanations are not perfect. There's a lot of holes, a lot of questions. There's a lot of missing links. So this is one of the missing links. The whole thing about the Egyptians and the pyramids and the Sphinx, how did it happen? How could they do this? So there is, to this day, there is not a black and white explanation from science on how this thing could have happened. But regardless, they were the most, of all these groups, okay, they were the most advanced, the fallen from Capella. Second group, let's take a quick look at it. The Hindu in Asia. They arrived, okay, and they brought in the ideas of philosophy and religion that they had in Capella. So they brought this, and using Emmanuel's words, they were the early voices of religion and philosophy. But they got here and they started forming castes, and that is something that will set them apart from anything else because, they were fallen and they are still not doing anything better than what they were doing up there, creating separation, separating peoples and groups and creating, special groups and castes and all of that. So those are the Hindu in India, Asia. Third group, the Aryans. The Aryans came, now those are the ones that came all the way from India with that migration, walking to the left all the way to modern day Europe. And those were the ones, the rebellious ones. They never liked the idea of being transmigrated. They thought, or they thought they should have another opportunity in Capella. It didn't happen, so they were transmigrated. So they were rebellious. And because of that, they kind of shut down their line of thought in terms of religion. It's kind of, I'm mad and I don't want to talk about religion. I don't want to talk about anything, above my head or anything out of this world. So they kind of shut down. So all their actions and all their purpose in life became very rational. That's how rationalism is born. And everything became so material. So one of the examples I gave you just a few minutes ago, the owning the land, the idea of this land is mine now. I can put my hands on the land. I own this land. It's mine. You can't get close. You cannot step on my land. So the idea of possession, the idea of material things, it comes from here, right? And from the Aryans, a lot of groups in Europe start to arise. I'm sorry. And you can see here, Latin, Celts, Greeks, Germans, Slavs, and a bunch of Indo-European families. They come in from this group. And here's another group, the last one, the Hebrews in Palestine. We kind of spoke about them a little bit, that they consider themselves a special people, a very special group, different from everybody else. So they practice something that we call, or actually not me, Emmanuel calls voluntary segregation. Voluntary segregation. They did not want to mix with anybody else. They had this idea of a prideful spiritual aristocracy that they were practicing in a very united group, because they would not mix with other groups among themselves. They were very united. They had the same line of thought. Everybody would agree with everybody else. They would protect one another. So they became this most homogeneous among of all the exiles, a very cohesive group. There was a strong bond, among all of them, something that we don't see on the other three. Okay, so it's interesting to see, as Emmanuel puts in the book, how all these four groups had their ways, how things happened, how they migrated across the land, how things were, being settled. It's very interesting. Again, I'm going to say this again. I encourage you to spend time. The book is not very long. The explanation for all of this that we're touching here in 2 classes or 2 meetings of 30 minutes each, that's not very long. It's probably maybe 30 pages or something, 35 pages. But it's something that it's not just to read and read. Oh yeah, no, that's interesting. If you really have interest on this thing, just get a piece of paper and a pen, read, go through, make notes, do sketches and drawings to understand what happened. It's a beautiful study, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful study. And I really encourage you to, go ahead and do this. Okay? All right. So that closes another chapter on our Spiritism, a closer look evolution. Today's our meeting number 12. We're closing chapter races. All right. So for this week, again, you're going to have the Spirit Trivia. So I encourage you to go to the website, evolution.spirittrivia.com, or if you're watching on the computer, you can use the QR code on the top left of your screen. You just go there and cast your answer for tonight's question. Next week, we're going to be here. We're going to look at tonight's Spirit Trivia, discuss, give you the answers, and we're going to move on to something else, which is the evolution, and that's a lot of information there, evolution of the perispirit. So there's a lot of science involved. There's a lot of biology, especially biology. We don't go too deep into biology itself because, it's not really what we need to do, but the basics, yes, we're going to touch on the basics of it. So thanks for participating with us, and I wish you well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.